Well, hello, everybody. My name's Amy Lasack. I'm the Senior Director of Corporate Training at Kirkwood Community College. And today I'm excited to be chatting with Joel Bennett, one of our instructors at Kirkwood Corporate Training. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
Good. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us a little bit. What we want to do is try to give everybody a little sense of who you are and what you do for us at Kirkwood Corporate Training. So maybe just start by telling people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I own Veel Hoeden Consulting, which is a leadership training company based out of Pella, Iowa. But I do training throughout the state of Iowa, both on-site and virtually, and work with leaders really around just some of the basic leadership skills. So helping people who have maybe been newly promoted into leadership to understand what it means to be a leader versus just somebody who tells people what to do. But I also work with leadership teams on the coaching side, whether that be one-on-one or group coaching, as well as advanced leaders with their own leadership skills.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about what you see as somebody who does this type of training. What are some of the biggest things that you see that new leaders struggle with?
Well, I think for a number of the folks that I work with, quite often they've been promoted into leadership because they were the best at doing their specialist role, whatever that may have been. So, if they're on the shop floor, they're the best welders, so they became the welding lead or the welding manager, or maybe they're the best software developer, and so now they're the manager of the software developers. And without any real training around what leadership looks like, they kind of see their roles as trying to duplicate themselves and other people. So telling people what to do, trying to get them to understand the process or the work. And there are definitely components of that in being a manager, but leadership is different in that you're really focused in on, building the capability of your team, providing guidance, removing barriers. So quite often that's what they struggle with is, they see their day-to-day as more directing work instead of understanding what it truly means to be a leader.
Mm-hmm. So how would you help a new leader? I'm a new leader and I was a great welder and now I'm leading a team of 4 and I'm struggling to get that across. What would your style be to work with that individual or that team of new leaders to help them get to that next level?
Yeah, so what we try to do is take them through some of the leadership basics. So one of the first things we often do is use, a tool like the DISC assessment to help them understand both their own communication styles and their own behavioral styles, and understanding that not everybody's going to be the same as them. And as a leader, a big part of your role is adapting your style to meet the needs of others. We also work a fair amount with how do you set clear expectations, because quite often the performance issues are not about willingness, but they're really about a person's understanding of what's expected to carry that forward. And so once we work through expectations, we really start talking about, okay, how do you measure performance when performance isn't where you need it to be? How do you go through the coaching process so that it's a win-win? How do you influence people that don't necessarily report to you, that may be peers or work for other teams, but you have a shared goal? How do you build trust on your teams and really allow that to drive some of the engagement that's necessary to not just get the job done, but to do it over time without losing, key members of your team. So we walk them through that process because much of what we realize is it's not about what you learn in class, it's what you take outside of class and try. And so we spend a lot of time on the application. So in class, there's definitely content that they're going to learn, but there's a context. How does this look at my work? How does this work with my team? What may be a problem, barrier, or challenge that I'm going to bump up against? And we talk about that during class, but then they take that assignment out. And, between the times that we meet, whether that's a week or 2 weeks, they come back and talk about what did I actually do and how did it go? And we utilize some tools in between to help them check in on their progress and understand what are they learning. And are there other resources they need to be employing to lead better? So that process from end to end, it's that content, it's that context, it's the application, and then measuring what's changed and is it having an impact in the workplace.
That's great. It's such a great way to learn is to take a look at what you're doing and then apply it and then come back and reassess how it worked for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so many facets of leadership to think about too, and the coaching part of it. Can you talk a little bit about that component of leadership and some of the things that you might do to work with somebody on how to improve in that part of it?
Yeah, so quite a few of the programs that we do from a leadership perspective around training, many of them have a coaching component built in. And so while there's going to be a classroom experience in the application that we talked about, quite often leaders aren't going to be, or new leaders aren't going to be willing to raise their hand in class and say, here's something I'm struggling with, or here's a challenge I'm having, for fear that they may look, silly, or because the situations can be highly personal, or they need to protect the integrity of the relationship they have where the coaching may be needed. So having a coach outside of class, which in this case would also be the person that's working through the training with them, can be helpful to really distill down what's the issue, what are some potential consequences or impacts that we need to be thinking about if coaching isn't done well, and then let's create your action plan. What are you going to do? What is it going to look like? And in many ways hold them accountable for actually having the conversation. So I feel like that's an important part of leadership, is not just the learning and the application, but getting an outside perspective. Because quite often when we're new, we do what seems natural to us, which may not always be, the right process or the right way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it certainly sounds like leadership is one of those things that it's an ongoing learning. It's not something where you're going to go through a training 1 week and then all of a sudden you're a great leader. You constantly have to build upon it throughout your leadership career. That's
Yeah.
great.
And one thing I would mention is I think for a number of people, leadership training, when they think about it, it's about the class and getting it done and checking off a list. And I think that's one of the expectations that we set pretty early on, is this is a process. I mean, you're not signing up for a class. You're committing to, over a time period, really focusing in on both leveraging your strengths that maybe you're now realizing that you have, but also focusing on some of those areas where you're not comfortable as a leader, whether it's giving tough feedback or stepping into what may feel like conflict. And if we do that well, the clients that we work with, sometimes I say they don't really care about the training, they care about the impact it's going to have. So you can have the best program in the world, get the best, evaluations back, but if they don't actually see it in the work that's being done inside their four walls and the impact isn't there, it's not what they expect. And so what we really try to drive throughout the program is, what's the impact the individual is seeing, what's the impact the organization is seeing, and trying to make sure that we manage that throughout, so that it's a win-win for everybody.
That's great. And so, Joel, I'm sure you've seen over time when you've worked with different clients, when they don't address new leaders and the ability to build on their leadership, what sort of consequences do those clients see in the long run?
Well, it's been especially apparent over the last 12 months, really for two reasons. So one, if you think about the labor market, there are more jobs out there than there are people to fill them. And so if somebody is not engaged in their work, or they don't have a manager or leader that they can trust, or they feel connected to, or that they respect, it's pretty easy for them to step out of that workplace and into another. And so we see a lot of issues with retention or turnover in areas where leadership may not be as strong as it needs to be. This whole idea of engagement, engagement surveys that organizations run, not just to understand if people are at risk for leaving, but are they as committed or taking ownership in their work inside the teams they're in. And a lot of that, Gallup would say 70% of what leaders do can impact engagement directly. And so helping them understand that it's not just about getting the work done, but it's how we get the work done through other people, and how much ownership they feel in the process. The third piece that I would say is, if they do not have a focus on developing their people and where they're at, developing their own capability to take on more responsibility over time, you get people that feel like they've dead-ended. They're in a role that they don't necessarily want to be in for the rest of their career, but they don't have a leader that's proactively thinking about their own development. And so they get to a dead end and they decide, maybe I need to do this in another department in the same company, or maybe I need to do this someplace else. And so really those three factors, especially over the last 12 months, we're seeing quite a bit of. And now with COVID, and one of the other issues, if there's a possibility for your team to still work from home or work virtually, is this whole piece of how do I manage a team that I don't get to see every day or be able to essentially interact with inside the office? How do I manage those remote circumstances that feel very different than the face-to-face? And so, over the last 6 months of COVID, that's been a big part of some of the issues that we're seeing in leadership teams, where especially with new leaders, but even experienced leaders who have never had to deal with that before.
Yeah, it certainly has created a whole new dynamic in how we approach leadership at the workplace, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Joel, how would you, if we had an employer that was interested in bringing in leadership training, how would you describe your style? That's one of the things we get a lot of questions about from employers. They want to make sure they pick the right consultant to bring in to fit their culture. So how would you describe your style?
So really the first step of any time I work with a potential prospect or client is sitting down and really listening to what are the goals you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and how does leadership play into that? And so what we really want to do is build a program that is going to reflect not only your values and internal to the company, but your objectives. And so if we say that one of your main objectives is to impact things like turnover, what we build within the program is going to mirror that. If you say it's to drive sales growth, or to help us move more efficiently or more effectively or productively, we're going to look at that as part of the program. And it's not just the classes that we offer, but it's also going to be the behaviors that we're measuring along the way, because we know that certain behaviors are going to get us closer to the goal or objectives that we have set, and others are probably not. And so we don't want to spend a lot of time on the ones that aren't well matched to the goal. So sitting down with them, understanding their needs. We also have some assessments that we can run the organization through to really hone in on what are your key areas of improvement that you could be focusing on, and then combining that with some of the strengths that you already have, so that we can create a more well-rounded program. And then understanding whether or not it is just training, or is it training and coaching, or are there other aspects that we need to be bringing in, like individual participant assessments or those of like.
That makes a lot of sense. Not all our companies are the same, so having a cookie cutter leadership program isn't going to work either.
Right, correct. And I think that's been the nice piece of working with organizations all over Iowa in different sectors, is realizing that the issue in one manufacturing company, for example, is not necessarily going to be the same in another manufacturing company or somebody in the technology industry, and really creating a customized plan that leverages both their unique needs and their unique strengths.
That's great. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. If anybody's interested in having Joel come into their company, all you need to do is connect with us here on social media, or you can send us an email at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu, or give us a call at 319-398-5623. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Amy.